you're neglecting the huge additional market out there that can bring you, again, additional recognition, additional revenue streams, additional uh, um, value, additional impact for whatever your company is doing.
Please help me welcome Philip Auerbach. I am very, very excited to sit down and chat with him because he is a social communication expert who has studied 8 languages and lives or visited over 55 countries. His expertise is how to expand clients' value to world audience, empowering them to target the 72% of the world that does not speak English. And this is super, super cool because we connected before, and we actually mentioned the fact that we gave the example of Mr. Beast, who's like the biggest YouTuber in the world, and there's a reason why he translates all of his videos in multiple languages, Spanish, Portuguese, Japanese, and he treats them like movies and um, dubs them exactly like movies. But Philip, tell us more before we get into why this is worth considering, especially if you're a big corporation. Tell us a bit about you. How did you start this business? What was the inspiration behind it?
Um, I had a global marketing consultancy back around 33 years ago. And one day, out of the blue, actually through a contact of a contact, I was approached by a group of translators. And they were in a very remote country, totally remote part of the world where one would absolutely not expect them to be. And they just asked whether I and my company could represent them, which I think means basically bringing them clients, and they would do the work. They would do the work of translation of any kind of business or technical content from or into many languages. At the time, it was 80, it's now 120. And I'll ask you to guess, where do you think these people were?
Romania.
No, not Romania. Far, far away from you.
I don't know.
Okay, so they were in New Zealand of all places, and but at the time, that was a country, is a country probably of around 3 million English-speaking white people and 30 million sheep. So the sheep don't count, but and the 3 million white people, as being English origin by definition, don't speak other languages. So that therefore it was quite unusual. Um, in any case, that's what got me started in the business. And because I have studied 8 languages and speak French and Japanese quite well at this point, and have traveled extremely extensively around the world, and I have a master's degree in international business, I thought, all right, this makes sense. Let's give it a go and see if it takes off. And here we are. Anyway, so that started basically in January 1991. And here we are about 33 years later. And we no longer use that original team of people who approached us, but that's how I got the start in the business.
That is so cool how life invites you to the most epic journeys without you even realizing it initially.
Yeah. Oh, and what was also most interesting is this was in the days far before the internet and far before email. And the way to communicate worldwide was an ancient device called a fax machine and a telephone. And some people may know what a fax machine is, especially if they're lawyers or accountants, but the vast majority of people may have to look it up on the. That's how we communicated, and that's how we got our start doing, uh, providing client projects through fax machines.
Yeah, yeah. Or watch a movie from the 90s. They're gonna see pagers and fax machines.
Yeah.
Beautiful. What are the languages that you speak, Philip?
Well, my French is quite good. My Japanese will improve when I go back to Japan. It was always conversational, and now it's a little bit rusty because, at least in this country, if one goes to a Japanese restaurant and wants to practice, that's quite difficult because the Japanese restaurants are owned by Chinese and Koreans. So
Interesting.
therefore,
Yeah.
that's rather tricky. But I've also studied uh, Latin, German, Spanish, um, Hebrew, Chinese, and I think an Italian.
Mm, hmm. I lived in Italy for 2 years. I picked up a bit of Italian as well, but very rusty with it.
Yeah, Italian was probably the second language I studied because I was going to Italy. But I don't. It's among my worst. I don't really. I'm very particular in how I communicate. So I said that I've studied. It doesn't mean that I speak it well, or that in this case that I can really read it and understand it at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah. Yeah, I'm probably at the same point right now with my Italian. Beautiful. So, Philip, why do you feel that companies are missing out on this opportunity? Like, why is it important? Because a lot of people might think, okay, whatever, it might be a luxury to invest in translating or branding or marketing into different languages. Like maybe we don't need it. But who is this for specifically, and why is should this be a priority?
Well, it can be for basically solopreneurs to Fortune 100s, as we would say in this country. Um, So any company, any individual or company who is looking to expand its market beyond the 28% of the world that speaks English. So that leaves another 72% of the world, which is billions of people. And in addition, in the United States alone, there are around 42 million Latinos who speak Spanish at home. So that's an enormous domestic market right here that a lot of people overlook. And of course, other immigrant languages such as Russian and Arabic and Chinese and Korean and Vietnamese and so forth here in the US. Um, but ultimately, it's about additional revenue streams, about increasing a person's uh, value and worth. If you're limiting to the one market that you know that's familiar, and that's perfectly fine, but you're neglecting the huge additional market out there that can bring you, again, additional recognition, additional revenue streams, additional uh, um, value, additional impact for whatever your company is doing.
Yeah, and I was thinking about it right now. I was talking to someone who has expanded their organization. It's a coaching for like sales coaching organization, and they've expanded in Canada, in the US, Australia. They were looking to break into the European market, and that's tricky in many ways because the majority of I mean, in Romania, for example, most of my generation speaks English, but the generation right after, they understand English because we grew up watching Cartoon Network, and that's how
Right.
all of us picked it up, right? And the girls were watching soap operas and they picked up Spanish. But now, like the youth and the generation above us, they don't speak English. So that's a massively huge market that you cannot tap into. And that's the same for Europe, right?
Mhm.
Like when this idea of capitalism and the American culture started coming into Europe, that's when people started speaking English, and that's a fraction of the population. So that was the conversation I was having because this person grew their organization through recommendations, through connecting with people with influence that could talk about her work. But in Europe, that doesn't apply. The only way to reach this audience is by basically running ads. So I think it's a very, very important service.
I'm sorry, you said running ads. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean it's important to have the service translated into the person's language, the person that you're
Yes.
reaching out to, you're hoping to sell to.
Yeah, what a lot of people overlook, especially Americans, we're very, I'll say, provincial culture in some ways and very isolated because we're an enormous continent with two huge oceans on both sides, and Canada to the north, most of which speaks English and some speaks French, and then Mexico, of course, to the south. Um, so the domestic market here is huge, and we're semi-isolated from the world if you choose to be, and not everyone chooses to be. And again, it's an opportunity to expand into the world. Um, And what most people don't realize is that around 60% of world internet users will only buy from your company if you address them in their native language. So
Right.
they may be able to read English. Many people can read English, but if it's the equivalent of if you buy a product and you get the instructions either in Chinese or Chinglish, as we would call it, perhaps, or Danish or something. If you went to IKEA and your packaging came in Swedish only, well, they have pictures, but in any case, if it came in Swedish only, how would you feel? So, yes, other people may understand it, but obviously you're making an effort, you're making an outreach to them to show that you're very interested in addressing them in their language and, very importantly, in their culture. And just because, for example, AI programs will translate, but they do not acculturate, they do not put the cultural adaptation that is very critical in many cultures, and well, most everywhere, actually. And these programs are also, they don't acculturate, they don't convert measurements, and they don't do a lot of expressions accurately. Mm-hmm. So if your text, if you're speaking, you're writing, your videos, whatever you've got, contain any of this, or for example, references to, for example, if you say to an American, you really struck out, or I batted 1,000. Well, those are baseball references, and that's fine. Right. But the rest of the world, most of the rest of the world, doesn't speak baseball. So what does that mean? And again, if you depend on an AI program to do it for you, chances are it will either be wrong or it will be very literal and therefore semi-incomprehensible.
Yeah, and it's also the culture of the company that's selling the service at the same time, right? Like having somebody from the company who understands the culture and can understand how to replicate that in a different language is very important at the same time. But somebody might say, okay, great, I'm gonna translate my branding, but I still need customer service in that specific language, right? What would you say to
Yes.
that?
Very good. Let me address the branding part, if you don't mind, first, because that's a very critical issue. So again, a lot of companies expand into the world, and the largest multinationals are the most guilty of this. It's absolutely mind-boggling. They will spend hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to introduce a new product into the world, totally oblivious that their company name, their product name, or their slogan does not translate properly into other languages. And sometimes these are very comical. So I will give you, this is an older example, but it's still very accurate. The company General Electric merged with the French company Plessey, and these are both sort of electronic companies. And the merged company was called GPT. And if you say that in French, GPT, it sounds like, and you please excuse me, it's a little unprofessional, but it sounds exactly like I have farted. And that's not exactly how you would like to communicate the name of your company. So therefore,
Well, that's free advertising right there, Philip. I mean, everybody, like the whole country's talking about I have farted, the new electric company. I mean,
right. So please come to us, or please come to a professional language agency to check your company name, your product name, and your slogans before you do anything launching abroad. So that was the first part of your question. And it is very, very inexpensive insurance. And now I forget the second part of the question, which is the most important part of what you asked.
I mean, great. Now your branding is in French, but then you need customer service in French
Customer
as well,
service,
right?
yes. So I'm glad you asked. So thank you. So a few ways we can do this. First of all, we have, and we now have a multilingual call center. So for companies that are truly interested in serving customers in other languages, our call center can answer a call in English or Spanish through the same bilingual agents. And if you need other languages, we bring in our, it's called OPI interpreters, over the phone interpreters. So this is another service we have so that if you either need the call center or you need to speak to a supplier, a client, a distributor, whomever it is, in another culture, in another language, which you don't speak well or at all, we have a service that runs 24/7. It's OPI, over the phone interpreting. We give you a toll-free number and a directory basically, and you either say or press the code for the language you want. With usually within 30 seconds, you are connected to a telephone interpreter, and you then have a three-way conversation.
That's interesting.
And this either works again through phone calls or with our call centers.
That's interesting. So basically the experts stay the experts and then you outsource the interpreters like like streamlining the whole thing.
And all the
Yeah,
interpreters, by the way, are very highly qualified and vetted. These are not amateurs by any means. These are,
right.
extremely highly skilled people who speak, who speak a lot of most business terminology.
Like I was when I was working when I moved back to Romania, I got a job in a call center and speaking Italian. And I was doing customer service in Italian, and I was so horrible at that job. I mean, my Italian was okay, it was fine, but back then, but like I didn't care. Like I had like maybe 200 emails unread from like the team leader. Don't hire people like me
Right.
for
No, and our
this
call
work.
center agents are truly outstanding and very highly professional, and they speak English without. Some of them are Latin American, but they speak English with a very, very mild, if any, accent at all.
Cool. So, Philip, what's your favorite language?
Uh, oh, it's hard to say. Very interestingly, um, I guess. Well, I hate to say it, but French is wonderful just because it was my second language and I enjoy it. And it's again at its mindset into European cultures. I love Latin. That was the very first language I learned. Um, and I get very frustrated because when I go into churches and I see Latin inscriptions or Latin uh, posters, for example, the Pope visited here, and here's a
Right.
description of his visit and so forth. I don't understand the Latin because that's the Latin not from the Romans, but after 150 to 200 years of evolution beyond that. So,
Mm,
so that frustrates me. But Latin to me
right.
is fascinating. And then the other is Japanese, mainly because the thinking is so totally different from anything Western.
Hmm.
Um, and so when a person learns a language, he or she also has to learn the thought processes and the thought
Yeah.
assumptions, basically, about the culture that simply don't exist or don't translate or don't work well in other cultures.
Hmm.
So, as a very quick example, Japanese is a very vague language where English is very precise, and German is even more precise than English in many ways. So, how do you communicate when you're dealing with such, different points of view, basically, or
Right.
different cultural assumptions?
Hmm. There was this Japanese American comedian. He was saying like Japanese, it's very different from English because the verb is at the end of the sentence. So
Yeah.
the reason why the Japanese are so smart is because they're patient to wait until you finish to get the meaning of the sentence. Like, for example, I at the store many hats stole. So
Right.
the sentence is
But
totally different.
as I would use the example in Japanese word order, um, on top of my desk's pencil, to my sister belongs.
Yeah, it's like backwards in a sense.
So, yeah, it's upside down, inside out, and backward compared to English word order, and most
Interesting.
European word order for that matter.
You know what? I might be curious about something because as Romanians, we have a lot of Latin influence and also Russian influence.
Right.
So we can roughly make out what somebody says in Italian or Spanish, but the vice versa doesn't apply. Like Italians or Spanish people don't understand Romanian.
Right.
So I'd be curious to see if you could pick up or like if
I can't. I've tried.
you've
When
tried, right?
I've looked at, I've read Romanian, and
Yeah.
I really can't. I mean, it's so far removed from Latin, which is really, because French, Spanish, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and Romanian all evolved from Latin. But to me, Romanian is the most removed.
Yeah.
I don't quite why. Perhaps
We
the Carpathian Mountains or something. I don't know.
we also have a Turkish influence because like we're in the center of Europe,
Uh,
so we picked
yeah.
up very different like from different cultures. Um,
And
and-
Portuguese, of course, because it's the other extreme, the
right.
other geographical extreme. It's also very different from, French, Italian, and Spanish, which are fundamental Latin languages.
Mm-hmm. What's a very unique cultural experience you've had in your travels that really stayed with you?
Um, I shouldn't say it, and I'll say it anyway. So I'll embarrass
Oh, that's
myself.
the best one.
I don't. Yeah. Um, so I studied in Japan in my junior year of college, and I went back 3 years later to do business. And I had never driven in Japan before. It was always by someone either drove me or I traveled by train or by subway or something like that.
Hmm.
Uh, so I did not have a sense of the distances in Tokyo. So when I went back 3 years later, um, I was perpetually late for meetings, which is very, very embarrassing because the Japanese are very precise. You should always be on time because I was taking the train or the subway and had to get to the station and wait and then go for the station and then walk from the station or take a taxi or something. So again, perpetually late. And then uh, uh, the Japanese are extremely polite. And so when you get to an office, they will always serve you tea. And I was, let's just say that my bladder was quite overloaded. And it was, I think it was the autumn, and I was starting to sweat because I just did not, I did not ask, may I go to the men's room? And so I was just sweating profusely because, and the Japanese kept saying, oh, it's hot, isn't it? Well, it wasn't hot. It was just that I couldn't relieve myself because
Right.
it would have been impolite to arrive at a place. May I go to the restroom after I've just arrived? And you have to have tea and do social conversations and so forth. And so, anyway, so I don't remember exactly how I coped, but eventually, after my last meeting, I was able to get to a restroom, and that was wonderful.
That is so funny. And for those of you like, this is literally exactly what happened before our meeting today. I was in a call with somebody. I lost track of time. I was 5 minutes late. Apologies, Philip, again. Like very unprofessional. And then when we finally got on the call, I said, Philip, may I also have 5 minutes to run to the bathroom? Like literally what
That's fine. Better before the session than during the session. That's
this is
fine.
the advantage of having a conversation with somebody like with has experienced multiple cultures, right? You're expanded. And it's so powerful. Like even not necessarily learning the language in and of itself, which is like installing a new mind in your head because you're thinking differently. Like to be able to speak Italian, you have to think Italian. Same with Japanese, same with any language. But just getting in touch with different cultures for me, it transformed me completely. Just getting out of my environment, it expanded my thinking so much.
Yeah, it's very powerful. It's very powerful to realize that very simply there are alternative points of view
Yeah.
than your point of view. And most people, most people think that they're right, everyone else is wrong. And relatively few people in in the United States, at least in this country, are willing to listen to each other and really listen and absorb. And this is something I've learned by my extensive foreign travels or world travels, that I make the distinction between observing and absorbing. And you can observe as a tourist, and I do both. It depends where I am and what my motivation is. But you go to the sites of Paris or Rome or China, whatever, and you see the major sites and you're observing, and that's fine. But do you really absorb the culture? Are you
Right.
really learning about the people, the culture, the music, the art, the foods, the ways of thinking, the religion, the philosophy, what's important, what isn't? How do you communication styles and just on and on and on, books and sports and so forth. And that's really where absorbing comes. And part of absorbing is learning to listen and accept. And this is very, very critical. Accept that there are other ways of looking at the same issue. And it's wonderful to give the analogy of an elephant. Two blind people are led to an elephant. One touches the trunk and one touches three blind people. One touches the trunk, one touches the leg, one touches the tail. And they all have very different perceptions of what an elephant is.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all right.
Right.
They're all correct. So, as I say to many people, sometimes there are multiple ways to scale a mountain, to go up a mountain. One way may be better than another in terms of getting there faster, more efficiently, but ultimately you're still going to reach the top, and that's ultimately the goal. So what? There are different ways to get
I think that's a huge lesson in leadership. And I talk about this with my clients. Leadership, from what I see it, is not, okay, this is the way I'm the head of the company, what I say goes. Leadership is when the marketing expert is talking, everybody shuts up and takes notes. When, the cleaning crew is talking, everybody shuts up and takes notes. It's a huge skill to be able to allow space for different opinions, for,
Yeah.
discourse, and see which one fits best at the end of the day.
Yeah. And that's partially what business brainstorming is about. The rules of brainstorming are that all ideas are valid. Just get them, put them on a board, put them on a tablet or something. Just do what's called a mind dump. Just
Right.
get them out. And then the team can evaluate, this is good, this is not good, this is more effective, that one perhaps is stage 3 or stage 2, whatever. So, but it's just a way of recognizing that all points of view are valid, and all people have something important to contribute. And this is something I went to a Quaker college, and most Americans have no idea what a Quaker is because they think it's this funny picture of this old man with a funny hat on a box of Quaker oatmeal. But that's not it. But the Quakers are, I won't go into a lot of history, but anyway, they're an English Protestant sect who were forced out of England for various reasons in the 1600s and 1700s, and they settled in the United States. And one of the many values they have that I think are very positive, as they would say, there is God in every person, that each person has something to contribute.
Yeah.
And whether that's the janitor or the restaurant, the cafeteria worker, or the therapist or whoever, to the CEO, each person has something to contribute. And just because a person has a position or has a title or has, some kind of specific role, well, you're in accounting, you don't know anything about that. Well, no, maybe the accounting person happens to be very creative and has a very good idea
Hmm.
of how to make the product work. So listen. And so this is very critical in any kind of leadership or any kind of company.
I had a very cool conversation with someone who would have, let's say, the human resource expert or, head of the human resource department. They would have to work together on a project with the front office or vice versa. Like whoever was complaining that the other person, like the other department was doing nothing, he would get them to work on a project together and they would learn about each other's jobs. And all of a sudden, that idea that they're doing nothing just disappeared and they actually realized, okay, this work is very, very important. And I couldn't agree more that there's God in every person. It's like, what's the most important piece of an engine? Right? They're all important. If you take one out, you don't have an engine anymore,
Yeah.
right?
Well, it's like, what's the most important part of the body? All of them,
Right.
because, you know, yes, you can survive without an arm and a leg, but, life is a bit more difficult.
Yeah.
Um, but, all parts have to work together in order for the body to function properly.
Yeah, exactly. Beautiful. Um, Philip, where can people get in touch with you?
Well, my website is auerbach-intl.com, and I'll spell it in letters and spell it in words, which is Auerbach -intl.com. And if I spell it in words, and I'm not doing
That's okay.
this in the military.
I'll
Oh,
link it in the description so people can
okay.
find
Um,
it easily.
So that's one way. And then they can email me at philip@auerbach-intl.com. Philip is one L, a Philip. And then also, as I've told, or as I reminded quite a few people, there was an ancient device that was invented in 1876, and it's used to facilitate communication, and it's called a telephone. And that works as well. So we've got two telephone numbers, one for the West Coast, one for the East Coast. Both numbers ring to our entire staff because we all have extensions. And if you go to our website, you will see our phone numbers. Either one will work. It doesn't matter. Just pick up the phone and call, and we would be delighted to actually talk to you, speak to you, which is, again, becoming a lost art in the United States.
Yes. Yes, everywhere, actually. Beautiful. Philip, I actually forgot to ask you, what's the vision for the business?
Um, I want to very much continue to expand the company to a lot of potential new markets, as well as just deepen the markets we have. Um, our services really apply to any business niche, uh, from aerospace to zoology. And I neglected to mention that our primary business is language translating and interpreting, but done in a very highly professional, accurate way. So if you're looking for second rate or if you're looking for mistakes, please rely on AI. That's perfectly fine. It's just not accurate, it's not precise, and it can potentially damage your own company's image for professionalism. But if you are looking for accuracy, quality, professional level, um, then we do it with a combination of AI with human professional linguists, all of whom have master's degrees in the art of translating or interpreting and who specialize in your industry terminology. And that's how we can do anything, any subject from aerospace to zoology, because the person who speaks wine doesn't necessarily speak software and doesn't necessarily speak real estate.
Hmm.
And each industry, as you know, has its own specific terminology, and that's what our linguists specialize in.
Yeah, that's very, very important, especially when you're marketing to a specific niche. You have to speak the specific lingo of that niche. Otherwise, you're done. You have no chance to
Yeah.
compete. Beautiful. Philip, thank you so much for taking the time for having this conversation. I'd love to talk more about your travels and all of the cool experiences you've had. And yeah, if guys you're thinking about expanding your reach, have a conversation with Philip.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me, Bogdan. It's a wonderful pleasure speaking with you, and I would love to continue with you as well.
Likewise.